ladies and gentlemen, 30 years ago, Dayton Peace Accords were agreed here in Dayton, Ohio, marking the end of the war in our region and paving the way for peace and democracy. Today with us is former wartime Foreign Minister Mate Granic, who will later on just to say even much more than I am going to say. Today, as we reflect on the progress made and the challenges ahead, it is clear that the principles enshrined in the peace agreement remain the cornerstone of the stability of Bosnia and Herzegovina, democratic development in Bosnia and Herzegovina. One of Croatia's core foreign policy goals is to assist neighboring countries through structured knowledge transfer, particularly by sharing our EU accession experience. We believe this is the way to turn our lessons learned into tools for regional progress. There are so many cooperation opportunities in the region, especially in terms of trade, infrastructure, energy, and EU integration. Croatia fulfill all its foreign policy goals, namely EU integration, NATO membership, and what remains its OECD membership, but so we are on the way to get it in next year in the first half of 2026. Energy security stands out as a vital area of cooperation. Through the Kirk, its island Kirk, LNG terminal, we offer diversification routes critical to region and energy resilience. Our partnership is renewable energy, solar, hydro, and wind are growing. Equally important is the development of the Ionian Adriatic pipeline that is to be linked to the Trans-Adriatic pipeline. It is crucial in providing energy supply across the region and the whole of Europe. Complementary to the Ionian Adriatic pipeline is the development of the Southern gas interconnection. This would ensure further gas diversification. Bosnia and Herzegovina's direct link to Croatia's gas network. South gas interconnection is an essential step in this regard. Beyond energy, the transport and logistics sector offer transformative potential. Key corridors, road, rail, and ports linking the Adriatic and to Central Europe are vital. Croatia's strategic port, such as Rijeka, Ploče, are well positioned to become strategic export hubs for the entire region. However, there is no economic progress with our American friends, and therefore, United States is our most important partner in the field of energy. Our LNG terminal, which now sources 60% of its gas from the U.S., significantly reduces our reliance of Russian energy. Namely, 76 vessels out of 112 came from United States. By the end of the year, we are doubling its capacity. Croatia is ready to serve as a key hub for American gas, strengthening energy security across Central Europe and Balkans. Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, the Republic of Croatia and the Croats in Bosnia and Herzegovina supported the referendum on the sovereignty of the Republic of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and after the declaration of independence, were the first country to send an ambassador to Sarajevo. All humanitarian and military aid to Bosniaks and Croats in Bosnia and Herzegovina came through the Republic of Croatia. The Republic of Croatia took care of 700,000 refugees from Bosnia and Herzegovina, Croats and Bosniaks, without a single incident. Another 300,000 refugees from Bosnia and Herzegovina came to the Republic of Croatia and went to other countries. the Republic of Croatia supported all three peace plans for Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kutileiro, Vance-Owen, and Owen-Stoltenberg plan. The unfortunate war between Bosniaks and Croats further complicated the situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I became Minister of Foreign Affairs and Deputy Prime Minister on the 1st of June 1993, and my most important task was to do everything possible to stop the unfortunate war between Croats and the Bosniaks in Bosnia and Herzegovina. In these efforts, I received full support of President Tudjman. The last meeting of the peace conference was held in Geneva on the January 17, 1994, and ended in complete failure as far as Bosnia and Herzegovina was concerned. 2 days later, on the 19th of February 1994, a crucial meeting was held that turned the tide of the war and the negotiations between Bosniaks and the Croats in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The Croatian ambassador to Geneva, Miomir Žužul, organized a dinner with Charles Redman, President Clinton envoy. The dinner at the Hilton Hotel lasted 5 hours. On behalf of the Republic of Croatia, I presented a model for ending the conflict between the Bosniaks and Croats in Bosnia and Herzegovina on the condition that the U.S. would take active leadership in the negotiations. Both Herzegovina, both Ambassador Žužul and I repeatedly started during the dinner that our proposal had the firm support of President Tudjman. It was agreed that we would immediately inform President Clinton and President Tudjman about our talks and that we would meet in 2 days. President Tudjman strongly supported our talks upon my return to Zagreb, and President Clinton did the same 2 days later. On the 4th of February 1994, I visited Holy See. In addition to the excellent talks with Cardinal Jean-Louis Thuram and Cardinal Sodano, I had a long talk with the Holy Father, John Paul II, lasting for 45 minutes. He firmly asked me and President Tudjman to do everything to stop the war between the Bosniaks and the Croats in Bosnia and Herzegovina and then throughout the entire territory of Bosnia and Herzegovina. He told me that radical Islam was the most dangerous for the world, but not Islam as our brotherly religion. I reported everything to President Tudjman immediately upon my return to Zagreb, and under our influence, personal changes were made in the leadership of Croatian Republic of Herzegovina. During the conversation with Malcolm Rifkind in London, State Secretary Warren Christopher called me to come to Washington immediately. That night, I returned to Zagreb, had a long conversation with the President Tudjman, and was already in Washington on the 25th of January. The negotiations were very difficult. The main problem was the definition of the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina. The Bosniaks, especially Haris Silajic, advocated a civil unitary state, while the Croatian delegation, which I lead on behalf of the Republic of Croatia, and the Croats from Bosnia and Herzegovina, led by Krešimir Zubak, advocated the federation and the state of Bosnia and Herzegovina as a state of equal constituent people and that all citizens of Bosnia and Herzegovina have the same civil and human rights. After a long conversation and lunch with State Secretary Warren Christopher, he supported the Croatian position. The rest was much easier. The Washington Agreement established the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina. The war between the Bosniaks and the Croats in Bosnia and Herzegovina ended with 24 hours. The UN Security Council and the UN General Assembly adopted the resolution on the situation in the occupied territory of the Republic of Croatia, in which the AMPA zones were declared occupied territories of the Republic of Croatia. These resolutions represent the international legal basis for the military and police Operation Flash and Storm. In early summer 1995, the decisive and energetic Richard Holbrooke took over the peace negotiator for Bosnia and Herzegovina on behalf of the United States. From the 4th to 11th of August 1995, the Croatian army, upon the orders of President Tudjman and after unsuccessful negotiations with the local Serbs, carried out a successful historic operation to liberate all occupied areas except the Croatian Danube region, the Operation Storm. After the success of Operation Storm, the Croatian army, in cooperation with the Croatian Defense Council and Army of Bosnia and Herzegovina, liberated a large part of occupied areas in Bosnia and Herzegovina on the basis of split declaration. When the Croatian army reached 20 kilometers below Banja Luka, and when Banja Luka was in complete chaos, President Tudjman spoke to Richard Holbrooke and Ambassador Galbraith, and Ambassador Galbraith. The Minister of Defense Shushak spoke with General Wesley Clark, while I spoke to the State Secretary Warren Christopher, all of them on behalf of the U.S. They asked us to stop the operation to liberate Banja Luka. President Tudjman accepted the recommendation and the request of the U.S. and the main strategic partner of the Republic of Croatia. Shortly after that, Richard Holbrooke invited us to negotiations in Dayton. The negotiations were led by Richard Holbrooke, and his deputy was Christopher Hill. The Croatian delegation was led by President Tudjman, and I was President Tudjman deputy chief negotiator. Defense Minister Shushak and Ambassador Miomir Žužul were also in our negotiating team. The excellent team of experts and advisors were led by Ambassador Ivan Šimonović. During the first 2 days, we spoke with Slobodan Milošević in inner circle with the help of Richard Holbrooke and Christopher Hill. After 2 days, the talks were successfully concluded. All of our important demands were accepted, especially the reintegration of the Croatian Danube region should be completed peacefully within a precisely defined time frame into the constitutional order of the Republic of Croatia, and that the head of the operation should be an American diplomat. Based on this agreement, the agreement was signed, and we were assigned the American general and diplomat Jean-Paul Klein as the head of the mission. Bosnia and Herzegovina was defined as a territorially integrated state consisting of two entities, the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina and the Republika Srpska, and three constituent peoples, Bosniak, Serbs, and Croats, within other citizens who have all the same human and civil rights. The principle of the agreement from the Washington Agreement was accepted. The most dramatic negotiations in Dayton were on the demarcation of the Republika Srpska and the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina. This happened 2 days before the end of the negotiations. At 4 a.m., Christopher Hill called me, asked me to come to the American pavilion. I arrived at 4:30 a.m. and found Robert Holbrook, Warren Christopher, Slobodan Milošević, Haris Ilajić, General Clark, and Christopher Hill in a good mood. Richard Holbrook offered me champagne, which I refused before seeing the plan. When I saw the demarcation plan, I firmly rejected it and said there was 0% chance that we would accept it. I asked Warren Christopher, who negotiated it. He told me that the plan was negotiated by Richard Holbrook, Slobodan Milošević, and Haris Ilajić. At 6 o'clock a.m., we broke all the negotiations with the agreement that I would call President Tudjman and Haris Ilajić would call President Izetbegović. President Tudjman supported my views and refused to come to the continuation of the meeting. President Izetbegović came to the continuation of the meeting. I immediately asked him if he supported this proposal. He told me that he did not, and that is how our meeting ended. It looked as if the negotiations were going to fail. At 3 p.m., I went to a restaurant alone for lunch. Richard Holbrook came to me and asked if there was a chance to continue the negotiations. I replied that there was, but that they should propose the new, more acceptable proposal. He told me to give him a new proposal, which we did in agreement with President Tudjman and handed it over to the American side around 4 p.m. The American side already responded to our proposal around 5 p.m. that they fully accepted that southwestern border of the demarcation between the Republika Srpska and the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and they partially accepted our proposal for the demarcation in Posavina region. Odžak and Orašje went to the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, while Brčko was declared as a district. At 5:30, President Clinton called President Tudjman. They talked for almost half an hour. I was present, plus Ambassador Žužul and Defense Minister Šušak. President Tudjman accepted the proposal, and the negotiations in Dayton were successfully concluded, and the agreement was signed a day later. The Dayton Peace Agreement was officially signed. Dayton-Paris Peace Agreement was officially signed on December 14, 1995 in Paris. The Dayton Accords ended the war and established the peace in Bosnia and Herzegovina, it gave legitimate political representatives of all peoples and the citizens of Bosnia and Herzegovina the opportunity to preserve this peace and develop the country. Thank you.
Thank you, ministers, for setting the stage for today's conversation. I'd like to introduce the moderator for this panel, Karen Donfried. She is the director of the Congressional Research Service, and her and her panel will take, and she will introduce their introductions. Enjoy.
Good morning, Dayton. We are thrilled to be here. Thanks to the two ministers for that great set of introductory remarks. What we want to do on this panel, and I'm joined by four terrific panelists, is as we think about the post-Dayton progress and what their challenges are, we're going to focus on the economic recovery and development piece of that puzzle. The Dayton Peace Accords ended the war, and that is a huge achievement, as we just heard from Minister Granic. But as we think about the 30 years that have followed that agreement, in many ways it has been marked as much by stasis as it has by progress. And there are many features of that, and we really want to dig into this question of economic progress. And let me first start with you, Ambassador Trocaz. Ambassador René Trocaz is France's ambassador and special envoy to the Western Balkans. And when you think about what the main challenges are facing Bosnia's economy, and for that matter, the economies of the Western Balkans today, what would you say?
Thank you. Thank you for the organizers and giving me the opportunity to answer this question. Economic development, recovery, and integration of Bosnia to a regional market, and from the regional market of the 6 Western Balkan countries to a global market, which is clearly the single market of the European Union. What it means is that you cannot divide all these 3 segments. I start with Bosnia, bearing again in mind that you cannot divide or separate Bosnia from its immediate environment. First, Bosnia has, as all the other countries of the Western Balkans, most of its trade with countries which are neighboring this Bosnia and also with the European Union. So there is no economic future of a country like Bosnia without integration, closer integration with the European market. I'm not here speaking of any politics, but these are facts which are based on the reality of the trade of this country. The second thing is that to have development, whether it comes to investments, foreign investments or domestic investments, developing trade, building partnerships, you need a stable governance. It goes without saying, it is something obvious, it is something needed. And let's be frank, we see that our Bosnian friends are doing well, there are some progresses, but there are also room for progresses. That's very important. You cannot bring an investor, a foreign investor, a French investor to a country where there is institutional instability. That's very clear. The second thing is that, again, you cannot disconnect every single country of the Western Balkans from the others. Of course, in the case of Bosnia, probably it's even more obvious due to the specificity of this country. So in order to develop growth, to give more strength to the economy, all these economies have to be much more integrated, and we have tools for that. One of them, I will limit myself to that, is the so-called Berlin process, of which where all the countries of the Western Balkans are, with other members of the European Union and some outsiders of the EU. But this, we have to work on regional integration. And of course, the third step is to get these economies and the economy of Bosnia closer to the European market. For that, we have some benchmarks, we have some rules. We are not at all I would say, punitive against these countries and against Bosnia. On the contrary, we want to open the door. We want to facilitate the development of the economy of this country. And here, speaking of the tools, I would like to give one example which I think is very important. It's the growth plan of the European Union. What is that? It's 6 billion euros in 3 years from 2024 to 2027 for the region. Normally 1 billion of it should go exclusively to Bosnia. And this is a strong support, not only financially. What the growth plan means, it means reforms, better and integration of the economies of the Western Balkans, integration of the Western Balkans to the European single market, and of course financing, huge, significant financing. But it means something else, because it's not only about money. It is about having this European perspective, and the goal is that by 2027, through the help channeled by the EU through the growth plan, the accession to the European Union will become irreversible.
Well, thanks so much. And I want to pull on this thread about the role of the European Union, because it does seem critical for the future of Bosnia and Herzegovina. I was looking up some of the statistics, and in 2023, 73% of Bosnia's goods exports went to the European Union. And EU countries are the top source of the comparatively limited foreign direct investment in Bosnia. You mentioned this growth plan, which seems so attractive, 6 billion euros on offer. But as I was looking into this, I learned that Bosnia is the one of the 6 countries of the Western Balkans that has not yet submitted a reform agenda to the European Union, which is a condition for Bosnia to get that first tranche of funding. And on our panel, we have Miles Raguz, who, among many other things, was the former ambassador of Bosnia and Herzegovina to both the European Union and NATO. And Mr. Raguz, you know Bosnia so well, you know the economics of the country so well. How much of a missed opportunity is it for Bosnia not to have concluded this reform agenda and have access to these funds?
Yeah, it's a big miss, but they can still do it, and it really it's up to them. And I think the new Deputy Secretary of State, Christopher, I forget the name now. Lando. He spoke yesterday, and he said the future of Bosnia-Herzegovina, future of the region, is really up to the local authorities, to the citizens of the countries in the region. So what he said to them, what he said to the 3 communities in Bosnia-Herzegovina is, please sit together, come together again, and try to reach an agreement. He did not specify the opportunity that is coming from Brussels, but it's the underlying, there's underlying clarity that this is what is at play. So the growth plan, which we heard about, is very important for Bosnia and Herzegovina, but for the whole region. And The European Union is committing significant amount of money. Money is one thing, but the actual reform elements are the other side of the coin. And this is where Bosnia and Herzegovina is not ready yet, but we hope that the country will get there. One of these new elements in the growth plan is really trade with the common market. And in the past, the trade was really focused on the countries amongst themselves. Now, the idea is really to integrate the country into the market of 27 countries. The first step was the Berlin process, the connectivity to improve the infrastructure in terms of highways and the energy corridors. Minister Rodman mentioned the one corridor in particular, which is on the table right now, but Brussels is also supporting initiative to get the region together and connect them to the whole of Europe. The other element, the new element of this integration into the internal market is to bring in the industrial production capacity of the countries in the region, allow them to trade more easily with EU 27. So in combination with foreign direct investment, this could really push the countries forward. So we're talking about recent developments, but in the last 20 years, I would say on the economic side, the countries in the region are doing pretty well. When you take a look, for instance, at GDP per capita, GDP per capita in the Western Balkans today is about 40% of EU average. Before the war, it was 30%. So even though the war happened, and even though it seems that they are developing slowly, they are still much better off today than they were before the war. So on the economic side, there is an advancement, but really the full advancement will come with membership. And I think Croatia is an example or a lesson learned in this case. Croatia was also plugging along pretty well on its own, but once it became a member, it blossomed. So today, the growth rates in Croatia are fantastic. GDP and income is really good. The average income, net income in Zagreb is pretty much the same as average net income in Paris. This is really impressive. But let me close. You also asked about what we need to get Bosnia and Herzegovina going economically. And I'll finish very quickly. I'd like to take us back to High Representative Paddy Ashdown. When he was around, he was famous for many things, but one of the things that he always emphasized, and he actually reported this to the Security Council at one point, he said the third constituent community, the Croats basically, he said that they are the most economically vibrant unit of the country and most entrepreneurial, and we should give special attention to those who are most active. And but what we have in the country is that this community is politically limited. They don't have the institutions that the other two communities have, and we should make a special effort to make sure that the economic motor in the country is free and fully ready to go.
Thanks so much. You mentioned the example of Croatia, and when I think about the process of EU enlargement, the countries that are already EU members do play an important role. And we're lucky to have Slovenia's ambassador to the United States, Ambassador Mirosic, here on the panel. And I wanted to ask you about Slovenia's role as you think about the possibility for these countries of the Western Balkans to join the European Union. And on the one hand, you could say, well, these countries, okay, they're now 40% of the EU average, they were 30%, but there's real upside potential for them if they join the European Union. So given that, is the carrot of EU membership powerful enough to incentivize the countries of the region to undertake meaningful reforms? And we're using this word reform. What do we mean by that? We mean fighting corruption, strengthening the rule of law, strengthening those institutions of democracy. Or is that carrot of EU membership too far away to change the calculation of political leaders in a country like Bosnia today?
Thank you. And I would say I would continue where Mr. Ragus just finished. And I would say Croatia's entry into the EU and relations between, especially economic relations between Slovenia and Croatia, can perfectly demonstrate what does it mean. Because our trade exchange with Croatia, I think, boosted enormously. Slovenia, when we entered the EU, our GDP per capita, our groups, our companies were, let's say, boosting, while when Croatia entered, interrelations or relations between Slovenia and Croatia, bilateral relations that are many times problems in the Western Balkans, were put behind, and we concentrated really on the economic exchange. And this is a perfect demonstration what membership in the European Union can do on an economic level and a political level. Regarding the enlargement, you know that Slovenia fiercely, and I have to say also with Croatia, fiercely support the further enlargement of the European Union. But let's be very frank, in the previous years, previous decades, I was Europe Minister. I sat on the General Affairs Council many times when they discussed the enlargement process, and there was not a clear political will, whether it will be from the side of the European Union or the side from the countries in the region. They were interested, let's say, more for European money than to reform the societies, what is the meaning of the enlargement process at the end of the day. In the past years, we managed to reform the enlargement process to make it more political, but we still see some hinderings. And here comes the factor of the transatlantic relations. I think my personal belief is that the latest uncertainties in the transatlantic relation can affect also the enlargement process in a way. We have a second factor. Western Balkans is not the only region to be meant for the enlargement of the European Union. Now, Western Balkans is competing with the eastern part of the Europe, namely Ukraine and Moldova, who are also the candidate countries. By the way, Slovenia and Croatia fiercely fought for the candidate status for the Bosnia in Herzegovina, and we managed to reach it, let's say, lately, and we hope that Bosnia and Bosnian leaders will take into consideration the enormous opportunity that is given by this political decision to step up on the, let's say, political process, decision-making process, consensus, to usufruct the Western Balkans Stability Pact there. Enlargement process, so if the political will in the previous years were uncertainty, now we have at stake two factors. The third factor, I would say, who has to perform the reforms first. This is the question that is rolling up in the European Union and in the region. Should European Union reform first with the decision-making process, because the decision-making process in European Union is not adaptable for the further enlargement, let's say. Or should the countries of Western Balkans perform first the reform of their society? And here is a compromise, like our French colleague said, that probably we have to see step-by-step integration of the region into the structures of the European Union, named first on the economic level. Here we have a very interesting project, since the energy reform, digital market in the region, and infrastructure has to boost. There is an interesting proposal that will connect European Union countries, namely Italy, Slovenia, Croatia and, let's say, Serbia with a high-speed railway from Trieste to Belgrade, crossing Slovenia and Croatia, because infrastructure is really the problem in the region. But returning to the political side of the enlargement process, if the crystal clear will of the countries in the region for the reform is, let's say, at stake, on the other side, also the political will, how to open, close, and all these negotiations is, let's say, too slow. That's why Slovenia and Germany, we are proposing to introduce in the intermediate, as an intermediate step for opening of the negotiations, which are many times blocked by the bilateral issues, to use the qualified majority voting in the European Union, which means at the end of the day, the enlargement will be accepted by the consensus, but as an intermediate step to boost the enlargement process, to enable the countries of the region to open and to perform the negotiating chapters and to perform the reforms, we are proposing together with Germany, and we have 14 countries for the time being on board, to open the chapters by qualified majority voting. You know that in European Union, qualified majority voting is a very sensitive question, especially in the enlargement and foreign policy, but this does not tackle the foreign policy decision-making process. It's just for the enlargement
And just for the
process.
audience, so the qualified majority voting means that an individual member state cannot veto a decision.
Cannot block the decision.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we hope that this will be understood in European Union. Of course, there are some countries that are, let's say, taken into serious consideration, but the meaning is strategic. The region of the Western Balkan is a strategic region for European Union. I named before the transatlantic uncertainties because the role of United States in the region together with the European Union was always immense, and probably it will be also in the future, but European Union should take the region as a strategic part of Europe, where the other competitors, namely like China and Russia, are competing as well. So probably in that light, we have to boost the enlargement process, but on the other side, the countries should be really adhered to the process of enlargement or to join the European Union and really to perform the democratic, economic and social transition of their societies in light of the future membership in the European Union.
So I think it's so interesting. Our first three panelists have really made clear these levels of engagement. You've got, of course, Bosnia and Herzegovina in the first instance, 30 years after Dayton. Then you have regional integration among these 6 countries of the Western Balkans. Then you get to the European Union and the promise of membership. And you brought in the US and the role of transatlantic relations. And we're so lucky to have with us Ambassador Angela Aguilar, who is the US ambassador to North Macedonia, one of those other 6 countries of the Western Balkans. I mean, I think we all understand from the introductory remarks how important the US role was for concluding the Dayton Peace Agreement. But help all of the Americans in the room understand what are US interests in Bosnia and Herzegovina in the Western Balkans today?
Thanks, Karen. I'm so happy to be here, and if I can, na moji dragi makedonski prijatelji, dobro dojdete u Dayton. I'm so thrilled to be here with my friends from the Macedonian delegation, and I really appreciate the conversation, and I so much appreciate the focus on economics, because I think that so much of the answers to the very difficult questions we've seen over history, and I can't touch too much on Bosnia, obviously, but the economics of the region drive, I think, so many of these solutions. As the American ambassador in North Macedonia and an American ambassador in the Balkans, what is very clear, and my colleagues have touched on this, is what happens in one country, be it Bosnia, Herzegovina, Serbia, Kosovo, North Macedonia, affects the others. It's a small region, and no country lives in a vacuum. And so the issues and challenges that are facing the other countries in the region are very, very real to its neighbors. And so one of the drivers for me and for us in Skopje is how those regional factors are playing in, how the transatlantic dynamic is playing out. And all of these are things that we have to look to because, frankly, the United States benefits when the Balkans are doing better. And so it is very much in our national interest for the Balkans to thrive, for there to be peace accords that actually come into place. The challenges that we see in North Macedonia are echoed across the region. In recent polling, the number one concern for voters was corruption and rule of law, followed by economic opportunities, and then education, health, and some of the other factors that I think we would hear from every other country in the region. And addressing those in a meaningful way is, yes, critically important to EU accession, but when we look at a country like North Macedonia that is being bilaterally blocked again from entrance into the European Union, the solution is not to give up until that happens, obviously. It's to push on those reform areas regardless of where those conversations are. At least that's the American view. We're not in the European Union. We believe North Macedonia should be. And let's not wait to start working on those critical reforms while we're looking to resolve some of these other points of neuralgia within the membership and procedures. So the opportunities, I believe, are enormous. One of the challenges, for example, that we've talked about in a number of sessions and amongst each other is the question of outmigration. It's very much a problem in Bosnia, but it is as well in North Macedonia and across the region. And what causes that? What are the drivers? It's economic opportunity, it is frustration with corruption, it is all of these factors that is causing young people to say, I may as well try to get to Germany or somewhere else because I don't have hope here. And so what can we do to create that hope? Because again, whether it's through economic growth, whether it's through energy diversification, infrastructure you mentioned is so critically important there, and we have Bechtel Lenka is working on Corridor 8 and Corridor 10 roads at the moment, which are also critically important to NATO. And so all of these issues are part of the overall opportunity vector and some of the challenge that I think together we can address.
So one idea you sparked in my head as you were speaking is when we think about how we on the outside can try to help and be a constructive force for these countries in the Western Balkans, often we focus on incentives. And the promise of membership in the European Union is intended to be a big incentive. The idea of a €6 billion growth fund is an incentive. But often in relationships, we don't only use carrots, we sometimes use sticks as well. And thinking about your time as ambassador in North Macedonia, you have seen the United States use the tool of sanctions, of designating certain individuals who have been proven to engage in significant corruption. And I want you to talk a little bit about, how do you in a policy role think about this mix of incentives versus sticks?
That's a great question, and corruption has been something that I've spent a lot of time focused on, and that I know all of us who are engaged in the Western Balkans are engaged in. Our former ambassador, Mike Murphy, really pushed on sanctions in Bosnia-Herzegovina as well. The point is, and I think the Deputy Secretary made this point yesterday, as the President had, is that it's not our job to come and tell you how to run your countries. And I think that's very important. However, we do have our own requirements and our own legal requirements that when we are faced with very obvious cases and documented corruption, that we need to call out those individuals, because frankly, that protects the United States and keeps them from coming and committing crimes there. But it is a remarkably useful tool, because what I have found in the Western Balkans is that when we have designated individuals, and I've heard this in other countries as well, no one has been surprised. I don't think there's been a citizen, at least in North Macedonia after a designation, who has said, wait, what? This person was corrupt? These are individuals that everyone is aware of. And there's enormous documentation. And some might ask, why did it take so long for that documentation to be gathered and for that designation to be made? Then we look at interference with the judiciary and other challenges. But frankly, I think my experience has been that this is what the citizens of these countries throughout the region want, for people, their leaders, other officials, business people to be held accountable. And that notion of accountability is remarkably powerful. And we have seen that actual changes happen after we have made these. And so we will continue to pursue those. I think it's something that all of us have worked on and focused on, and can be an incredibly useful tool.
So it's interesting to think about how outside events influence what happens in the Western Balkans. And arguably, the most significant thing that's happened on the European continent in recent years was Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022. And, I was trying to think about how has this affected developments in Bosnia and Herzegovina? And it seems like it very clearly did, in that, you have this invasion in February of 2022. In December of 2022, the European Union named Bosnia and Herzegovina as a formal candidate for membership. In March of 2024, the EU agreed to open accession talks with Bosnia. And I'm going to come back to Ambassador Tokaz on this, because I'm curious if, were those steps forward by Bosnia related to progress the EU had seen on the ground in Bosnia? Had you seen actual progress on reform, or was there a sense that because of this outside environment, because of this challenge to European stability, because of Russia's full-scale invasion, we in the European Union need to focus on deeper stability within the Western Balkans? And I ask that because all of these things become connected. I mean, you mentioned enlargement fatigue in the EU and European citizens saying, we're not sure we want the 6 countries of the Western Balkans in, because they have some endemic problems like corruption. And, so you have enlargement fatigue, you have this desire among EU members to reform how they make decisions, because you want the EU to continue to be effective in decision making, but you also want to stabilize the Western Balkans, which is your neighborhood. And I'd like to ask you sort of a similar question maybe that I just asked Ambassador Aguilar, which is, how do you think about the mix of carrots versus sticks? And there's been a real desire in the European Union not actually to use the tool of sanctions, and there may not be unity in the EU on using that tool. So help us think about how EU policy and US policy maybe are or are not aligned in some of these cases.
I think we're working for the same goal on both sides of the Atlantic. That's one. The second thing is that you also have, as you pointed out, 2 different segments, 2 different dimensions. One is stability, and we, of course, are very worried about the stability of this region in the global context of the European continent. So this is why we are very much pushing and fighting, if I may say so, for maintaining the integrity of Bosnia. This is a key point, this is crucial. And this is something which can lead to different options. You mentioned some of them, but Again, territorial integrity of Bosnia is key for us for stability of the continent. This is something which concerns the European Union, my country, France, but also, I think, other players such as the United States. The other dimension is the European path, which you can, of course, combine with European stability. Regarding that, we have kind of a contract with Bosnia. I would be very frank, very blunt, if you allow me, in this context, to say that no one is obliged to become member of the European Union. The EU, and we say that very friendly, is not begging anything. We have, of course, stability concerns, but what we wish is that the countries of the Western Balkans will join the European Union. Why do we say that? First, let's start in a very basic way with a map of Europe. When you consider the Western Balkans, they are surrounded by the European Union, so there is a vacuum there. We think it's a pity for us, we think it's a pity for you. And we think we have to join forces on both sides, the countries of the Western Balkans and us, to progress in this direction. And some of these countries are doing well, and we see efforts in all these countries, including in Bosnia. And this is precisely why, not only for stability reasons, but because of some progresses in the reforms, the European Union collectively, all the members of the EU, decided last year to officially open the negotiation process for Bosnia. So it addressed two challenges, stability, and also to reward the reforms. I would like to conclude this answer reminding that when we speak of the Western Balkans as a whole, seen from our window, we speak of 16 million people, which is more or less the population of the Netherlands, and the GDP of Slovakia. This is to say that it's something important, but it's also something the European Union can absorb. The main hurdles, the main difficulties are these tensions, these problems, these fragilities, sometimes these conflicts. And this is what we have to overcome, and we are absolutely convinced that the best way to overcome these problems is the European Union.
That was really helpful, thank you. And I want to broaden the perspective and not only think about the US role in the region, but also when we think about economics in the Western Balkans, and I'm looking at Miles Raguz, help us think about what role Russia plays in the region, and then go even broader, and what is the role of China's or PRC investment in the region? Help us understand these two other important actors.
Can I do the carrots and sticks instead?
Yes, and anybody, please comment on anything you like. Yeah, please, of course.
Good. Yeah, actually, I would like to on the carrots and sticks, and then we can come back to China and Russia. I think sanctions is a very important tool, but it's really a temporary tool. It's a tool to reset a narrative. But the sanctions do not necessarily lead to a solution. Mm-hmm. And I think, Dayton is a perfect example of this situation. Serbia was under sanctions for good 4 years, increasing level of sanctions, and nothing happened in the region. In fact, by June 1995, even United States was ready to give up and say, let's divide Bosnia. Ivo Dadler, the National Security Advisor, writes about this in his Getting to Dayton book. And not only was United States ready to divide Bosnia, even the Bosniak side was ready to accept that. And I see Ambassador Žužul is here. And he knows this very well because the last meeting where the Bosniak side accepted division happened in his presence, and I think Ambassador Rodman was there as well, and the Bosniak side accepted. And they said, okay, That's that, and in 2 years we'll allow the Serbs to secede. This was based on an agreement that the Bosniaks and the Serbs had reached 2 years before. But then in July something happened, basically Croatia's Operation Storm. And what I'm trying to say is there was, the solution came locally within the region. So sanctions reset the picture. They weakened Serbia to a certain degree, but it allowed Croatia to develop its military capacity to establish the balance of power. And the solution was local, not sanctions. And I think, I don't know if Ambassador Goldberg is here, but he mentioned it yesterday. He said, basically, Dayton was set up by Croatian actions in August 1995. So that's my story on carrots and sticks. Sticks are very important to reset the process, but the solution has to come locally. So even in Bosnia-Herzegovina today, there's lots of talks about sanctioning, doing smart sanction on certain parties, which is fine to reset the narrative, to reset the logic, but the solution will have to come between the parties themselves. Hopefully not militarily. I don't think any of the three sides really have this capacity to do anything militarily, but again, going back to Chris Landau yesterday, he basically called on the three parties to come back together and reach the agreement between themselves. So hopefully that solution in Bosnia-Herzegovina will come on the Landau principle, not on the military principle like Croatia did in 1995. So now to Moscow and Peking in the region. I think, yeah, they are definitely involved, and we know that they have close relations in Belgrade and Banja Luka. But this support is mostly political, and I would say it's the strongest in the Security Council. I'm not sure it's very strong on the ground, because it's really the Western countries that have the economic power, and we should not fret Russia as much as we do, because we have to accept the fact that they have certain interests, historical interests, cultural interests, but they are not as strong as we think they are. I think on China it's really the same thing. They try. And they actually, they don't do it politically, they do it financially, but I think by now the countries in the region know, let's say, the operational method of China, which is basically to involve them in heavy debts, which then they try to, basically solve to the benefit of China, of course. And I think I think the countries in the region recognize the method in this regard. And on Moscow, I think we should not be as afraid as we are. They are not as strong as we make it sound.
So you don't think Bosnia's energy dependence on Russia gives it a powerful lever?
Yes. This is absolutely true, and but there's a solution to this, and I think Minister Rodman alluded to it, and the solution is there, and hopefully that this would be able to be finalized under a different structure, more realistic structure with the new administration.
So it's interesting because a couple of times the solution is there, but it hasn't been quite made real yet. And we talked about the growth plan for the Western Balkans and the fact that the Bosnians hadn't yet agreed on a reform agenda. I think you said Bosnians, they're not ready yet. And I just sometimes wonder how much time we have. And it's a point actually that Ambassador Aguilar made earlier, but I want to actually draw you in on this, which is if you look at population decline in the case of Bosnia and Herzegovina, it's really quite stunning. And we know that the size of your population does, of course, affect your economic output and your economic prosperity. And at the time of Yugoslavia's collapse, Bosnia had a population of 4.5 million. And today, well, my number's from 2024, Bosnia's permanent resident population in 2024 was probably around 2.5 to 2.8 million. That is quite a stunning decline in population over these past 30 years. Lots of reasons for it, right? There were wartime refugee flows, low fertility levels, high rates of emigration. And let's just stick with the high rates of emigration for a moment. It is estimated that 50,000 Bosnians leave Bosnia each year. And if you look at that group, they are disproportionately young, educated, and skilled. And so a lot of them go to Slovenia, they go other places too. But what does this mean for Bosnia's future if year after year that part of the population is voting with their feet?
Well, is lacking behind. This is it. And the gap is not narrowing, but is widening probably in the region. That's why all these instruments, including Berlin process, was meant to, from the rule of law, political stability, economic adaptation, and let's say step-by-step inclusion into the European Union, was meant to keep the young people there. But let's be very frank. I would say one thing which I'm exploring in my personal opinion for many years alone. I think European Union did a big mistake in the previous times. You know, we live now in a times of strongmen. We have strongmen are really very much important. They can do deals, they can do whatever they want. But in the Balkans, European Union was betting on a strongman in several countries. And I wonder what was the result. My personal opinion is that European Union should focus much more on the civil society, democracy, institution building, rule of law, and including more and more young people. Otherwise, and the examples in some countries in the region are showing us, young people are fed up and they will leave. It's not money. It's not money that young people are always interested. It's the environment in which they would like to live. And the environment is organized structure of society based, let's say, on a rule of law, that the rules in the society are more or less clear and not unclear like still there. To be honest, every single society, including Slovenia, has problems in that kind. But I can tell you from, since I participated in the transition of the Slovenian, complete transition of the Slovenian society from the, let's say, socialist to the market-oriented economy, from the half authoritarian to the democratic policy, I would say Slovenians are not leaving Slovenia. They're happy to live in Slovenia because the society is transformed in a way that everybody has the possibility in the society. If the young people are educating in the schools and then later do not have the equal possibility in the society, then they will search where would be better for them. And that's why they are leaving. It's not money, it's the organization of their life and let's say a normalization of their life in a normal society, which they considered used to be a Western type of the society. Meaning, to be frank, young people are not rushing to Moscow or to Beijing. They are rushing still to Rome, to Vienna, to Berlin, to United States. So there are still structures. There are still structures that are interesting for young people, and the homework, let's say, of the European Union is try to bring these structures back to the region. But here we have a problem. I would agree with my French colleague. there is no necessity to join the European Union. It's not a homework of the European Union to do all of this one. You know, the European Union is the major partner of all the countries that are in the enlargement process. And it's not visible. You go to some country in the region, everywhere is Russia, China, thank you there, except European Union. And probably the politicians will have to decide. I doubt very much that it is possible to join European Union by three-hatting. You know, the political will should be very explicit from the political elites, and this is the discrepancy in the region between the political elites and the young people, you know. So the political elites should express a crystal clear will to join the community of the European Union has problems inside the European Union, also with the values and all that kind of things, and probably does not want to import more problems into European Union. But the will is on the countries that would like to join, whether they would like to adapt or not. Of course, if the young will sense that this is not happening, they will leave, which means that the societies in the region will be dependent upon the strongman that probably has less interest to join the organized societies because they have other interests, you know, behind the curtains there. Sanctions, I'm not very particularly big fan of sanctions. Even Slovenia would like to see in Bosnia-Herzegovina that the regional players will resolve a compromise in a political way, not to use the bone powers, for example. And I'm more inclined towards the positive examples. For example, Slovenia and France are developing together a cybersecurity training center in Montenegro, which is a big success. And let's say it's interesting also for young generations and young people there. To conclude, not just economy, it's still a political question of the will, whether we would like to join to European Union or not. Not three and double hatting there. The will has to be expressed, and the homework is upon the countries that are there. Otherwise, nobody is obliged to join European Union.
So we are at time, but I want to give the last word to Ambassador Aguilera. And what I want to ask you, you know, when we think about Dayton and the important role the U.S. played and the important role Dayton, Ohio played, you know, I was thinking back to President Trump's articulation of really an anti-interventionist approach to world affairs recently when he was in Riyadh. And when you think about Bosnia and Herzegovina or the Western Balkans going forward, the next 5 or 10 years, what does that mean for the U.S. approach to the Balkans? And do you think that the U.S. role is or will become smaller, and the role of our European friends, partners, allies will appropriately become larger? What do you think?
I think it's a great question, and I think there's a differentiation between interventionism and partnership. And you know, we're not closing the embassy and leaving because we've seen a lot of our assistance programs being cut. We are still very involved and very engaged, and I think the way that Deputy Secretary Landau described it yesterday, the hand is still extended. If the partnership is, if we're willing to develop and work on and build on the partnerships. I will say something that I think about a lot in the context of Dayton, and I have over the course of the last few days, Karen, it's as we look at Bosnia and we look at the region 30 years later, I have a sense of urgency. And I think it's very easy to examine. I think that Dr. Kemp said it quite beautifully yesterday at the opening, that are we really interrogating history, or are we simply admiring it? And I think there is something to be said for the urgency of the interrogation. And what are we learning from these lessons? And as we look across the Balkans, we talk about the rate at which young people are leaving. I think we have to stop admiring the problems and really focus on the solutions. And what are we doing to offer energy diversity, for example? And we do have some examples of that. And what are we doing to build infrastructure? And as you say, why are the young people actually leaving? It's not for the money, it's for the opportunity. It's for a hope for their futures. And so looking at that and saying, what are the practical results of our activities? And in that sense, the United States is not going anywhere. When we have willing partners who want to engage in programs, in activities that benefit, in my case, North Macedonia, but also benefit the United States. Because if we are working on interdiction, on border security, on real day-to-day issues, then they will not only benefit the country of North Macedonia and the Western Balkans, but they will benefit the United States. And so for these reasons, for all of the shared, very global kind of partnerships that we have, we'll be right there.
That's a great note to end on. And I think as we focus on this post-Dayton future for Bosnia and Herzegovina, of course we want that peace that was created by Dayton to continue, but we also hope for stronger democracy and a more prosperous economy for Bosnia and Herzegovina. And the four people on the stage, all in different capacities, are doing their part for creating a stronger Western Balkans, a more prosperous and more democratic Western Balkans. And we are so lucky to have them. Please join me in thanking them.